Hello, welcome again to my YouTube channel, Old School English Teacher. Have you ever received a paperback from your English teacher with a little comment in the margin that says, "You didn't develop your ideas"? You scratch your head and you think, well, how do I develop ideas? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about. How to develop ideas so that our essays are interesting rather than boring. Writing strategies, rhetorical modes, and methods of development. That is how we develop our ideas. And you're thinking, well, what is she talking about? Well, all three of those little phrases mean the same thing. They are simply ways to develop our ideas. Now, I have a term for these three strategies, but you won't find my term in any English theory book. I call them the 8 magical tools, because they are indeed magic, because these tools can turn any piece of boring, undeveloped writing into something vivid and memorable. The first magical tool, or method of development, is narration. The second is description. The third is process narration. The fourth is definition. The fifth is example or illustration. The sixth is classification. The seventh is comparing. The eighth is contrasting. I know you're all familiar with these terms, but maybe you're not using these magical tools enough in your writing. We're going to start with narration, and I'm going to show you how to put an anecdote or a short, pointed story into your essay to make it come alive. Okay, narration is very attractive to the reader because we love stories. Now, here are the qualities of a well-told story. It must have conflict. It is organized by time. Now, the time can be, you can begin the story in the middle, you can begin at the end, and flashback, or you can begin at the beginning, but you still have those constraints of time. We follow Aristotle's Poetics, and I know you're familiar with the schema of Aristotle, but we'll also review that. Now let's examine what conflict is, because a story must have conflict. I've had many students over the years tell me, I have no conflict in my life, therefore I can't complete this assignment. And I'll say, well, do you have siblings? Do you have parents? Do you have friends? Do you have neighbors? Have you ever been stopped by a cop for speeding? That's all conflict. We all have conflict. Conflict is simply the struggle between two opposing forces. Think of one bone, 2 dogs. Think of one girl, 2 guys. Think of one toy and 2 3-year-olds who want that toy. So there's conflict all around. We just have to pay attention. Now, there's 2 types of conflict that we want to examine when we're writing a narrative. We have internal conflict, and that's the individual versus him or herself. And that is like the conscience. We're struggling with the conscience. We're struggling with our morals. We're struggling with the expectations of our family. And so we've got that inside conflict going. And then we have external conflict. And we have the individual versus nature. And there's a long tradition of the individual versus nature. We have, Moby Dick. We have Too Light a Fire. Long tradition of the individual versus nature. Now we have a long tradition of the individual versus society. We have a popular novel series, Hunger Games, and that's the individual versus a dystopian society. We have the individual versus another individual, and those are the Marvel comic books, with the superheroes. So Conflict is essential. Now, in a short narrative, you will definitely have the internal conflict, and you will probably have one or two of the external conflicts. But just be aware that you want to develop these conflicts. Now, I know some of you are still not convinced that conflict is necessary, but it is, because when a character in the story has conflict in their life, they have to make a choice. And that choice brings about change and growth. And the character is different as a result of this conflict because of the choice that he or she had to make. So, without conflict, there's no change, there's no growth, and guess what? There's no story. So it's very important that we have conflict in our narratives. Now, how do we organize a narrative? I mentioned earlier that we organize it by time. And we tell the story in past tense. And some of my students have a problem with staying in past tense. They'll flip to present, maybe even go into future. And you want to stay in past tense. Also, you want to stay in first person. You don't want to say, oh, you could see the beautiful field filled with elk. Well, no, you have to describe it. I can't see it because I wasn't there. Another little challenge we have with the personal narrative is that people want to write about too large of an event. Remember, this is not an autobiography. This is just one little event in your life where you had to make a choice and you're different as a result of that experience. Now, I've been stressing how we write in past tense, but then, of course, we always have the exception. If you write dialogue in your narrative, you're going to write that dialogue in present tense. For example, "What are you doing?" the stout store manager yelled, rushing towards the meat counter. "Who, me?" the elderly woman asked. "I saw you slip that roast into your purse," the manager snapped. "That's no roast," the woman laughed. "It's my coupon pouch." She pulled out an oblong pouch as big as a football from her even bigger purse and waved it in the air. The manager laughed. "Okay, you got me. I apologize. Go pick out a free roast." Okay, so a couple of things I want you to notice. 3 things I want you to notice. We are in present tense here. That is no roast, present tense. It is my coupon pouch, and pick out a free roast. Those are all present tense. I want you to notice that the punctuation is tucked inside the quotation marks. I also want you to notice that each time someone speaks, we get a new paragraph. And that is very important. It really makes it very clear to the reader who is speaking. So that's our exception to the rule. Okay, let's review the elements of Aristotle's Poetics. We have exposition, where we see who the characters are, we create a setting, we set up the situation, and we have the inciting incident. Then we have that rising action. There'll be little incremental moments on this rising action that leads to the climax, which is the place in the plot that has the most tension. And then we have the resolution or conclusion. And in a personal narrative, we do not want to say, "This is the lesson that I learned," or "This is the moral of the story," because that's kind of cheating. We're not doing our job as a writer. We want to show what the character was at the beginning of the narrative and how that character is different at the end because of the choices that they made. That's the challenge of this assignment. Okay, I have an example here for you. It's a short one. The title is The Inconsolable Tyrant. I've highlighted predictable as well because I want you to remember the title and this word. I've highlighted the descriptive details in red. You don't need a lot, but you need enough to invite your reader into your experience. This is my topic sentence. I don't like bringing babies to weddings or funerals because babies are so unpredictable. Yet I had promised my daughter I would babysit my 1-year-old granddaughter. So my husband and I packed Lillian's diaper bag with animal crackers, a sippy cup, cloth books, and Pepper, her stuffed cat. Bravely, my husband and I took Lillian to the funeral of a dear friend. We sat in the church where I listened attentively to the eulogy, and my husband played peekaboo with Lillian and Pepper. We almost made it to the benediction when Lillian let out a piercing cry because Pepper had fallen under the pew. I tried to retrieve the toy with my foot, but I inadvertently pushed it beyond my reach. Lillian's cry grew until it became stereophonic. My husband whisked her out of the chapel, yet I, and anyone who wasn't deaf, heard her wailing in the foyer. Within a few minutes, the funeral concluded, and I rushed out to rescue my husband from the inconsolable tyrant. No need. She was asleep. Babies are as changeable as the weather. Okay. I have inconsolable tyrant here towards the end of my essay, and I have the word changeable, which means basically the same thing as unpredictable. So I've created a little frame here. And when the beginning and the end of your narrative share a common element, like I did with, I used the title and I put it in the conclusion, you have created a frame and you're signaling to your readers that you're in control of the writing and that the narrative is complete. Okay, I would like you, for your student practice, to write a first-person narrative in past tense. Please follow Aristotle's Poetics. And if you're not sure if your story can sustain, 4 to 6 paragraphs, test it against Aristotle's Poetics. Write down the characters, write down the setting, note the inciting incident, and plot the little incremental marks for the plot up to the climax. And what is your resolution? How did you end? Okay, and that's your test. If it looks like it's going to be a viable narrative, a viable story for the narrative, then go ahead and write it out. But it's always good to test your story first against Aristotle's Poetics. I want to remind you to use a variety of sentence structures. Use your simple sentences, your compound, your complex, and your compound complex. But I would highly suggest that you begin your narrative with a simple sentence. Can you include that? That is vivid description when you do. Remember to keep the time frame small. You are not writing your autobiography. You're just writing about one small event where you were forced to make a decision and you were different as a result of that decision. Aim for 3 or 4 paragraphs. I wouldn't go more than 6 because you want to stay in that nice tight time frame. This will take longer. Be patient with it and take the time to test your story against Aristotle's Poetics. Okay, my reading recommendation is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a psychoanalyst in Vienna. He knew Freud, but World War II broke out, and he was sent to a concentration camp with his wife and his parents. He was a psychoanalyst, and he went around helping people deal with the harsh circumstances that they were trying to survive in. And he came up with 2 observations. The first one was that if people have purpose, they're going to survive. And the people that had purpose, they had a reason for living, they survived the concentration camp. And the other principle that he discovered is that we should not search for happiness as much as we should search for meaning and purpose, because then happiness follows. So I highly recommend this book. It is very inspiring, very insightful. especially in this world today. We're always chasing after happiness. And he's offering something a little different, that perhaps we should chase meaning and purpose. So with that, I wish you good luck in writing that personal narrative. Don't give up, because those are valuable stories that you can share in interviews, in speeches, and in your academic writing. So with that, I wish you goodbye, good luck, and good writing.